And we're live here on Talking Point, WSN, the Content Capital City, Gattaca Street. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Reports of our having to have a replay are greatly exaggerated. To borrow a phrase from Mark Twain. Now, with that said, there is a lot to get into. Flying solo today, Sean Michael Small. Hopefully, we'll have some good discussions after the hour. But before we could get into all of that, and let me just, I don't know if this is a trigger warning, but I do want to touch on the EU parliamentary results and maybe share something. Some people might not want to hear, some people might have technically observed already or have been observing, and what I think it could mean for our own elections, because it's not a monkey see, monkey do situation, but rather it's just natural extrapolation. But with that said, apologies for starting a little late, so let's go into today's daily review. And starting off this morning is a topic that I find somewhat ironic. And I'm not entirely sure. The irony is in more ways than one. So I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to start. So let's just jump right in. Apparently, Minister of National Security Fitzgerald Hines, he kind of took a little bit of umbrage with regard to some of the commentary, which to some extent is universal, right? To some degree. Because we had a situation where a YouTuber, not the first YouTuber, went to impoverished areas that had some degree of gang presence, spoke to these people, and then when he published his videos, he ended up getting arrested and charged. First, he was arrested on the basis of the Anti-Gang Act, I believe, and potentially immigration. But then he was eventually charged with sedition, and a lot of the commentary coming out, a lot of the criticisms, the low-hanging fruit is, what about the other people in the videos? Well, Minister Hines has decided to defend the police and the government and their policies by saying, no, we have done some degree of investigation, and these videos have provided us some degree of evidence. They have some degree of value, not just for intelligence, and arrests have been made, which is ironic. Because, well, first, I do have to wonder if I usually am the person that says we could hear more from the officials. We should hear more from the officials. And to some extent, this is the criticism. And if that is the truth, that the videos provided evidence that led to some arrests, the minister is right to let us know, because otherwise the narrative would be misleading, would be incorrect. And he has a right to push back against that narrative. It's just that I don't know if I'm going to say the minister, there was some fault in him doing so, or perhaps the TTPS is continuing down a fault that I don't like, because obviously the minister makes these statements, but then when contacted, the police are unable to verify. And according to reports, it is not the case that all of the arrests, because I think the minister was pointing to a group of 24 arrests, at least by one account. And according to the police, what they were willing to divulge is not all of the arrests were necessarily due to the Anti-Gang Act. There were things like robberies and specific crimes, which the YouTube videos themselves would not necessarily, at least one would think, provide direct evidence for. So not all of the arrests that the minister was pointing towards potentially were with regard to the YouTube. But my point is the police seemingly were at a point where they did not want to reveal much information, in part because the generic statement, the usual line given to the public and the media is that we can't speak about ongoing investigations, which is a line that I think needs to be redefined. It's not one I want to see broken. I just find that there are times when It's used too much of a blanket statement to just not talk, and it leaves us in the dark. So the minister is giving us information, but to what extent, I don't know to what extent is it that he spoke prematurely or too soon and gave away too much, or the police is holding on to the usual defensive strategy to not talk. So I'm not too sure who I myself think may have made a minor boo-boo, But there's another aspect of this, and that is, of course, with Mr. Christopher Hughes, who, technically speaking, now I believe at one point he said he may have wanted to do more filming here in Trinidad. Although, I believe most recently his immediate plans were to go home once he had, I think it was this week, his most recent court date, which I think was scheduled for June the 12th. I could be mistaken. But he was going to have that date and then potentially seek to return home to Canada. And to be fair, our court process takes so long. To hold him here for the preliminary inquiries or for the pre-trial hearings, etc., etc., that might actually open up the government to a whole slew of liability, especially since he's out on bail. And also internationally, it might look bad. But the fact of the matter is, while he himself claimed that he provided no evidence or testimony to the police, and he has discredited any sort of claims or statements that he led the police on a walkabout to point out where he was filming what, I do wonder if to some extent this revelation might put Mr. Hughes at risk if he seeks to go back to those communities to continue filming, which unofficially might have been somewhat of a brilliant move by the minister if the goal is to prevent these sorts of filmings again. Now, Mr. Hughes did say he advises people to wear masks when he interviews them. To what extent people reveal their identities. And ironically, there are other videos from other YouTubers. So now, to what extent the police is going through the back catalog, I don't know. Also, the timing of it, I don't know if we should question it. The police did their investigations. It is what it is, the time difference. Maybe it's because at the end of the day, it's two different sets of charges. And of course, Mr. Hughes was more apparent and obvious with regards to what he was doing. Although it makes me wonder again, look how they rushed to arrest him, and then it's only after the fact. They didn't arrest him on the basis of sedition. So how is it that his arrest, potentially with some of the same legislation, these alleged gang members were arrested? I say alleged because it just hasn't been proven in court. To what extent his arrest was, railroaded through to tweet, whereas what we're seeing now is a more natural pace of the investigative process. Some of the reports is it's only 7 out of the 24 who were arrested from the YouTube videos. And at the end of the day, media will always, let me rephrase. Criminal elements that come on media will always have these risks. That's why usually when you have a documentary, not only would they necessarily be masked, but you might also film them in shadow, obscure their voice, use digital blurring on their face, etc., to hide their identities, in order to ensure that they will be willing to speak openly and freely for the informational value, the documentary value, in a situation where they otherwise would not because they don't want to get arrested. And I can't fault journalists and documentary filmmakers for that. And I would not fault Mr. Hughes for that stance either. It's not his job to do the police's job. And that is a trick that will only work once. Once filmmakers start to snitch, then the filming will stop one way or the other. But I do find this case interesting. And I wonder if these charges will stick, or if it's just, they're complaining, so we have to do something about it. And based on what the police officers, the spokesperson said, it could be that, well, they just kind of lumped in some of these charges with other charges. It's not as though it was just all about going after the video. Now, to what extent is it politics and to what extent is it policing? Only time will tell, but at the rate it takes for the courts, we probably won't know. By the time those cases get to trial, we'll probably forget, to some extent, the origin of it. All right, moving on, a couple of quick stories. So, the Secondary Roads Rehabilitation and Improvement Company, the SRRIC, they're claiming that they're being treated unfairly. There's unequal treatment from the Ministry of Works and Transport because they are responsible for transforming secondary road infrastructure. Not only does the state apparently owe them approximately $150 million from 2022, $100 million from 2022, and $50 million for 2023, which that alone is not surprising. State not paying its bills, not paying itself for work that one of its entities does. This is not new news. It's just we get a new example of it. But then, apparently, the CEO, Antonio Ross, of the SRRIC, he's complaining that there's another entity, at least one other entity in the Ministry of Works and Transport, Program for Upgrading Roads Efficiency, PURE, who has a similar mandate to them, and he's complaining that they're being treated better. Now, the Payroll Secretary says that's not true. It's just that the SRRIC is not necessarily, doing all of the correct steps to get its work done, which the CEO is saying that's not true. Now, with little to go on, the theory that comes to mind, and I don't know how likely this is, so this is pure speculation, is that potentially, usually what happens is you make a new entity to replace the old entity because of whatever problem. BWE was replaced by CAL, and you got rid of the union, except now the court is saying, no. This lack of union thing could only go on for so long, and the pilots, the aviation workers union, the pilots union, etc., from BWE, they're coming back in. And similar things have happened. Of course, Petrotrin, they broke it up into different companies so that Heritage could go off and look like they're making a profit, and the refinery could wallow in despair. So now we have allegedly PURE and the SRRIC looking to do similar things. PURE took care of all secondary roads. SRRIC is supposed to improve or transform secondary roads, so it might not necessarily be, I don't know what the specific language of the mandates are, but they're covering some of the same territory, to say the least. And it makes me wonder if there was some sort of internal politics going on. It could be different people are fighting for their fiefs. It could be that somebody wanted to replace PURE and then that initiative or agenda was abruptly halted halfway. I'm not entirely sure. Because I can't necessarily think of a good reason why you're going to have multiple entities that do the same thing or something close enough to the same thing, because that sounds as inefficient as all you know what. So is it just mismanagement, or is there some sort of internal backfighting going on? I don't know. We have no real indication. We just have the CEO of one company saying, my entity is being unfairly treated, and we're owed a lot of money, which, that last part, like I said, that's not new. Then to mention a next story, quick. This one kind of took me for six. There was a businessman traveling to Tobago a while ago, 2021, right? November the 24th, 2021. He had his firearms user's license and a magazine with ammunition on his person in a pouch when he was looking to take the air bridge to Tobago. And granted, I understand we don't want people to take ammunition willy-nilly, even if they don't have their firearm on a plane. And the fact is he did not have his firearm. So the police Of course, they find the ammunition, it's scanning his possessions, the police come, they confiscate the ammunition and the clip, they confiscate his FUL, but then apparently they go to his house and they confiscate his firearm. And then they have him in the police station, but eventually they don't charge him for anything. And then it's 2021, he has yet to have his firearm returned, and he has complained that his business was robbed and he was unable to defend himself because his firearm was confiscated. And he's suing to get his license and his firearm returned to him. My question is, to what extent, if you're not going to charge a man, how could you confiscate property that was not on him and not part of the violation? Because I could understand confiscating his license, and I guess maybe because you took his license, you took his firearm. But then if you're not going to charge him, why was it not returned the same day? And then, from what I understand, the attorneys for the police, technically the commissioner is being sued, but I'm not entirely sure if she had a direct hand in this situation, because you can't necessarily attribute every single decision made by officers under her directly to her unless we have something specific to say to that. But apparently the lawyers representing the commissioner and the police in this situation, they're looking to get instructions on the return because they need a written order, and they're saying something like 6 weeks. My whole thing is we are now, potentially 2022, 2023, halfway to 2024. So we're over 2.5 years, just over 2.5 years. And now they're basically, to try to stave off the lawsuits, they're saying, well, it's going to take 6 weeks to get a written order, which I find hilarious because I don't know in what world a written order takes 6 weeks. Even if you don't want to fast track anything, I still don't understand how it takes 6 weeks. It might take a few days for the commissioner to cross her T's and dot her I's and check in with everybody on this file before she signs off on it. Maybe a week, maybe even 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I feel it might be generous, but 6 weeks? And again, I do wonder if this has something to do with the general policy of let's just stymie private firearm users for no reason except they're the low-hanging fruit. And apparently 30 handguns were used in the, whether stolen or lost or diverted, private firearms, which we assume to be handguns because automatics are illegal, were used in crimes, and somehow that is going to make a dent in the amount of automatic weapons gunning down groups of people. Although to be fair, this is probably not the commissioner's policy. Remember, the Prime Minister, of course, he was very much defending a policy that he has not stated what it is. So we are only left to assume. But this case, I find, is somewhat ridiculous. Again, he wasn't charged, unless I'm reading the stories wrong. It's a story that I wanted to present yesterday, but we didn't have time. So maybe my memory, I'm misremembering. But he was detained, he was not charged, but his possessions, he was denied them for over 2 years. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into more stories. And then, of course, like I said, I want to get some commentary into the pendulum swing of politics in Western democracies. But we also have some quick hit crime stories as well that I want to bring up, some interesting doozies. Stay tuned. This is Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios, but they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to Zogama, ladies and gentlemen. And another story I wanted to get into yesterday, but we didn't have time. This is interesting and unique, and I want to say kudos, but also caution people from trying to repeat what one robbery victim managed to pull off to some extent. It might have been due to luck. So there was a report in yesterday's papers where a woman, she was a victim of a robbery. She was sitting in a car, right? And two men, apparently, one armed with a firearm, came to rob her. She threw her keys into the bushes or what have you, and they stole her phone and they drove off. She then proceeded to get her keys, find her keys, go in her car, start her car, chase after the robbers, and apparently crashed into their vehicle. And what kind of makes this, you know, to some extent, there was luck involved because she was fortunate. These robbers did not seek to use violence against her when she threw her keys into the bushes. Maybe they didn't want a car, so it didn't matter to them. But the other aspect of luck is, after the accident, she went, or the crash, she went to report the incident to the police, where one of the robbers apparently came to the police station, the same police station she was in, to report the accident. And he was subsequently arrested, as well as arrested in connection with another, I believe, incident, a motor vehicle larceny. So I would caution anyone that has read this story or have just listened to my summation of it, don't try to repeat what this lady did. Now, there was in one report, I think she may have been or may not have been a Coast Guard officer. Regardless, again, if you confront criminals in any sort of way, there is a risk that you will be in an escalating situation that could lead to more and more violence. So, again, be cautious. But that said, kudos to this lady for standing up to herself. I wish it was not necessary for her to do so, or she didn't have to do whatever it is that she did. Now, moving on to the next story. Something interesting that I saw in today's Guardian. And this is the first time that I will be referencing one of my colleagues in the third person. But Karen Shashera was interviewed, and she was asked about the debate on taxes coming down the pipe because of the state of the economy and because of the state of government revenue. And this is something that she was basically, I wouldn't necessarily say predicted per se. It's not like she said, this is my prediction, X, Y, and Z would happen. But for the most part, she has been talking about her doubts over the revenue situation from the very beginning and has continued to do so since this budget was first presented. So kudos to her. She more or less saw this coming on the pipe. However, you may be surprised to know that she's not necessarily just saying things to bash the government. And she has gone on to say, I agree with what they're doing. This is with regards to potentially raising taxes or adding new taxes, etc. And she is quoted as saying, they have to do it. They've got to do it. It needs to be done, and they need to be more aggressive with the Revenue Authority and even with the current Board of Inland Revenue and Customs. The government has no choice. That is very clear to me. And what she is speaking about specifically is to potentially increase VAT on, or taxes on high-end products, which in a way does make sense, especially because it could also help deal with some of our imbalance in trade, and of course then our foreign exchange position. High-end products are luxury goods for the most part. She's not talking about necessary pharmaceuticals or medical equipment or things like that. And I get what she's saying, because in a vacuum, she is correct. she is correct in a vacuum. They have to make hard decisions. The question is, can the population bear these hard decisions? So, again, in the report, Political Sciences, Dr. Indira Rampersad, she thinks it's foolhardy for the government to use this measure, right? And she's even pointed to the fact that a lot of people are complaining about not getting their VAT reimbursement. And this is also something that is somewhat common during COVID. To get access to some of the grants that was allegedly promised to various subsections of society / the economy, right? There were some payments to hotels which money rolled over, apparently, allegedly, into the second year of COVID because it wasn't all paid out in the first year. Which, fine, accounting-wise, it looks like, well, we still have money to give out. But on a practical level, you have to ask, did they do so to kind of hide their liquidity problems or to help better manage their liquidity? Remember, the Auditor General also complained money that was supposed to go into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund from, excess revenue or extra revenue due to better conditions last year was late to go in, which could have been a liquidity issue as well. And she's cautioning, look, we are not the most vicious protesters, but we will respond in the polls. And this is one area where I'm not entirely sure at the national elections we always respond in the polls. But given that this is the second term of the PNM, people might look for a change, even if the alternative doesn't seem to be quite that enticing. And therein, this is the most interesting part of it to me. An economist now, Dr. Valmiki Arjun, he noted that while taxes are necessary, TNT is not getting value for money. And I think this is where some of the commentary that I have done throughout the last couple of months has been, because I have never really looked to be a proponent or to be a supporter for increased taxes. And I've kind of questioned it, but I also can't deny the reality. At the very least, and I would argue the government should be considering it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they should choose it, but they should go through the motions, go through the exercise, see how bad it could get, see what it could do. Maybe you might see some taxes where there's some room, some specific tweaks here and there. Well, should they do the whole hog? I don't know. To some extent, you have to go through the exercise to really know. You don't just want to make decisions based on assumptions that might not always be the right decision. But I think what he said there, value for money, and it leads to the lower third that I present to you. Productivity, efficiency, reduction of waste. Because at a time when the Minister of Finance is saying that we have to be more cautious and have more controls on government expenditure, when we've already seen the government limiting expenditure, one could argue as much as possible, or maybe as much as they think is possible for their agendas. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it. But there are still allegations of various different examples of waste occurring in the system. Not necessarily big things like multi-million-dollar projects, but fancy cars being bought because, hey, we don't have to pay VAT or taxes on it, so it's relatively cheap. Though, man, it's still, expensive, 900,000 or whatever for some of these stupid things, right? Cars and SUVs or whatever. Or maybe it's 400,000, or maybe it might be even, but it's not necessarily the cheapest, most cost-effective option in a situation where we don't always need luxurious vehicles for public servants. We need working vehicles. Yes, working air conditions for public servants. I won't knock them on that, but we don't need the high-end things. And a lot of these examples and anecdotes, and you might hear about them as well, they are relatively small scale, but they add up. And then, of course, what ministry, what state entity might be over bloated with employees, might be underperforming, might be inefficient, etc., etc. Again, just look at one of the previous stories. There are two entities in the Ministry of Works and Transports that have to see about secondary roads. and it seems as though not enough effort was put into differentiating them. And I pointed out it might be an inefficiency. I mean, if we want to take the benign reason for such a situation happening and not go into the further speculations. And that's the thing. We can't afford not to tax. We can't afford to tax more. So all we could do then is ask, what do we want to be or not to be? Call back. Previous episode this week. Moving on. This is disheartening. Another student, I believe it's a Form 2 student, 14-year-old, Faisal secondary school student. He was the victim of a stabbing incident. I don't believe it was within the school grounds. It was in front of the school. Another boy allegedly pulled out a knife during a scuffle and stabbed the victim in the right side of his chest. However, he is still stable. But I will like to point out that to some extent we are very lucky. And I say we, not just his family, but obviously his family is very lucky. He is very lucky. But we are also very lucky that another young man did not end up killed, because earlier this week, I spoke about a young man who died from a stabbing. Not that much older, 15 years old instead of 14. I believe he was only stabbed once as well. And we're not talking about big bowie knives or short swords or claymores were used. We're talking about knives that a student might have on them. So apparently, for whatever reason, and listen, I knew of a student in my year when I was in secondary school, and that was over 20 years ago, who had a knife. But he never pulled it out to use it as far as I knew. So from what I reckon, he had it to defend himself when he went into the tougher areas that his life might have forced him to experience. But this is different. Students are now apparently feeling that it's appropriate for them to pull out knives to deal with their problems with other students, and for whatever reason, the consequences does not bother them anymore. So it's not now gangsters killing gangsters, and they don't care about the consequences. Now it's students stabbing students. We don't necessarily know for sure what the motivation of the previous stabbing earlier this week was. But this is a bad sign, because this is becoming a trend. This is becoming more frequent. What are we as a society going to do about it? We cannot just tell the police service, hey, we need more police in the schools. We don't have enough police to deal with the gang violence, with the guns. Next quick hit crime story. This one, I actually did the newscast yesterday for WSN that included a story. I wanted to speak about it today because I find it's not the most heinous thing that I have read this morning, because there was a story on bestiality, but this is one that I think matters more to society. What someone does with an animal, yeah, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But this story here, a PH taxi driver, apparently he is accused, or it is alleged, that he picked a girl up for school, took her somewhere else, potentially beat her, allegedly raped her, and then dropped her off near the school. And obviously the first thing is, a man apparently rapes a 14-year-old girl. That's bad. That's really bad. But what compounds it and makes it stupid is that then he drops her off near the school, as though somehow this is normal. As though somehow this is fine. Now, again, maybe there's more details we don't know. Either way, whatever scenario you could cook up with, this sort of result bothers me. And to some extent, I do have to wonder, this is not the first time we've heard of these stories, how much more are things like this happening? And do we have to worry about things like this trending upward in the amount of incidents? Because again, consequences is something in TNT that apparently no longer exists. Politicians don't have consequences, public servants don't have consequences, national security officials don't have consequences, Coast Guard, no one holds them into account, there's no consequences for the border being open. And of course, criminals now are basically more and more starting to feel that the law is not going to touch them, no matter how hard the police try and actually do get some results. And this might lead to more crime. And the irony of it is, it's almost like a self-generating cycle. The more crime there is, the more overburdened the system is, the more difficult it is to deal with all of the crime, and the ratio of solved crime to unsolved crime is going to get worse. All right, I'll save the last story for tomorrow because it had to do with child labor. And something interesting came out, and perhaps I may even speak with Ashraf about it, because the TTPS spoke about child labor. Our media ambassador spoke about the various complexities of it earlier in the week when he came on Talking Point. But now it seems that the government is looking to have a blanket, heavy-handed approach, which usually governments do, and then without understanding the complexities of the issue, it comes back and slaps them in the face. So I find this very hilarious. But I'll save my commentary for that tomorrow. I want to go straight into, I said I wanted to give an opinion on what we're seeing in Europe. And I don't think it's necessarily limited to Europe, because to some extent we've seen similar things, or at least there have been rumblings of similar things in Latin America for a while as well. And this is not the first time we've heard of things in Europe. I think maybe Brazil, Italy, Argentina at times, Spain at times, etc., etc. There's a pendulum shift in politics. And we might see now an overcompensation for the excess of one side. It might be going too far in the other direction now as populations get frustrated. But let's get a little bit of the background on what has specifically triggered me to speak about this now. It's time to cue this.
Well, in Europe, voters in 27 countries have elected more far-right members to the European Parliament. That body has limited power, but the vote is having a significant impact. The results have prompted French President Emmanuel Macron to call for a snap parliamentary election in his country after suffering a major defeat at the hands of Marine Le Pen's right-wing party. Our Remy Inocencio explains.
J'ai décidé de vous redonner le...
I give back to you the choice for the future of our parliament, said French President Emmanuel Macron, dissolving the Republic's legislature in a political earthquake. After France's far-right parties, for the first time, won more seats than the parties he supported in Europe-wide elections for the bloc's 720-seat parliament in Brussels. Macron's call for a snap election starting June 30th comes days after he and President Biden met to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. If Macron loses further support, that raises the chance Marine Le Pen's far-right National Party will gain, with talk of telegenic 28-year-old Jordan Bardella, president of France's National Rally Party, becoming premier, and Le Pen possibly becoming president in 2027. Voters in Germany, Italy, Austria, and the Netherlands also sent more far-right candidates, some in Germany campaign using Nazi overtones, to the European Parliament. They include candidates who campaigned against immigrants, against support for Ukraine, against climate change policies, and against dependence on trade with China.
Thank you so much.
But despite the rightward shift, Europe's center is still holding.
There remains a majority in the center for a strong Europe.
In Paris, Macron warned that the rise of nationalists and demagogues is a danger to France, Europe, and the world. His gamble that this sudden election will shock French voters and keep them from shifting even further to the right.
Okay, so Remy is joining us now from London. I personally find this absolutely fascinating, Remy. So 4 days of voting, more than 400 million people eligible to vote, but I don't know how many people actually come out and vote for the parliamentary elections, for the EU parliamentary elections. But what is the European Parliament going to be looking like over the next 5 years?
Right. Well, basically, European voters have pulled the Parliament, 720 seats, to the farthest right it's ever been, Henry. And we've got a graphic with the provisional results, so we're still waiting for more to come in. But let's go ahead and bring that up. We can take a look at that. I'll guide you through it. Generally, the parties on the left side of your screen, those are the reds and the green colors, those sides lost seats. These are parties that are more socially liberal, more globally minded, and that advocate for climate change policies. But as you go further to the right of the screen, then those lean center-right. There's a big blue block right about in the middle, the center right there, and then more extreme right the further you go. These parties all gain seats. And it's this this spectrum that goes further on, this more extreme side that is causing people anxiety. This bloc includes France's National Rally Party, Germany's AfD Party, and Italy's Brothers of Italy Party, and those have neo-fascist roots. So generally speaking, we can see that the gain to the blue and all the way to the right side of the spectrum here gaining, and the left wing, the more liberals, losing, and that is what's causing anxiety.
So, since I gather that the general feeling about the European Parliament is that it doesn't have a lot of teeth, a lot of strength, so I imagine only certain people are going to be kind of motivated to participate in this election. That being said, of the people who voted, what is driving this shift to the right?
Sure. Well, ultimately, European voters show that they're more concerned about what's directly and really negatively impacting them. Immigration, we know, is one of the biggest issues, and people finally got their vote to say, hey, we have had enough. And we can really draw a line from the rise of right-wing politics with the rise in the number of immigrants, both illegal as well as illegal, that have been coming into Europe over the years. Voters are also pushing back against climate change policies, and we saw that the Greens Party, on that graph, it was the Green, in the Green, they lost about 20 seats. People don't want to pay for new policies to cut carbon emissions or to pay for electric vehicles, which they're trying to phase out in Europe. And there is, of course, the cost of the war in Ukraine. Right-wing parties have been saying that they've given enough to support Ukraine over the past few years or so. Europe has committed, most recent estimates put it at $155 billion, and we know that the war still is going on with Russia looking at the northeast of Ukraine and Kharkiv there. Many people are tired of paying. They want that money to come home, to stay home, and that's why we're seeing the rise here in nationalism across so many of these countries, especially the top three economies of Europe, Germany, France, and Italy, and the rise of the far right elsewhere.
Very interesting. Well, we will see what this means for Ukraine, immigration, climate change over the next several years. Ramy, thank you so much.
It's an interesting phenomenon because to some extent the Western world got very liberal and progressive. And in some ways it was a good thing, and in some ways it was a very bad thing. If you were a fan of comedy, you have some extent some knowledge of what happened, but it was more than that. It was more than that. And to some extent, society generally is kind of naturally moving away from the extremes. However, some of the damage by the actions of those at the fringe end of the left, to some extent, the damage is done. And populations are now responding potentially. They're overcompensating. Now, it's not just in Europe. It happened in Latin America, where conservative politics became, more popular in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Paraguay, and Peru. And the thing is, though, in Latin America, where you have quite a lot of religious practitioners, Catholics primarily, to some extent, you could understand a natural acceptance of certain conservative values and ideologies. But Europe is extremely, well, not extreme, they're more liberal than America. So one of the things is when people say left wing, right wing, center, extreme left, extreme right, it doesn't always mean the same thing each time. Now, the other thing is the EU Parliament is a very unique political entity. 700 plus parliamentarians that represents, a large number of countries which, ironically, were traditionally successful due to their natural homogeneity of their population, particularly the Scandinavian countries, etc. But then, even if they didn't have immigrants and new cultures being brought in by immigrants, they themselves, despite most of the world, it's similar to some of these stereotypical thoughts about Africa, right? It's all one big place with one race. No, it's not. The various different peoples of Africa have different genetic traits, different histories, obviously different cultures. And it's the same thing for Europe. Different histories and different cultures. Not too long ago, they were warring with each other on a regular basis, and as one war ended, the next one began. World War II happened on the heels of World War I. We had the second war to end all wars after the first war to end all wars in the same continent. So that also colors the situation to some extent. It makes the politics very complex. But that said, to see that right-wing politics is regaining a foothold in Europe, because it's not as though it didn't have a foothold. Make no mistake though, Nazism is actually a centric ideology because they are national socialists. And if you read the history, you would understand why I say they're center. But with that said, of course, some of the more extreme values that prevailed in that were from the right-wing policies. And to some extent, I can't say that it's not going to continue to exist because these things just do. But to what extent is it all extreme right-wing? I don't know. Immigration is an issue in Europe and in North America. The economy is an issue in Europe and in North America. Therefore, financing a war that does not, in theory, directly have anything to do with them is a bitter pill to swallow. Climate change, and I've said this during COVID, and I've said this a couple of times after, cautioning people, and the war in Ukraine just showed, if the economy is not right, at the end of the day, people are not going to starve for the sake of climate change. People are not going to freeze to death in winter for the sake of climate change. Hence, Germany, one of the biggest political proponents in terms of a state, of a country, they went back to coal, as Karen pointed out yesterday. But now we have to be concerned about the consequences. First of all, obviously, the overcompensation might mean we might trade in extreme left, which I believe was particularly bad, for extreme right, which obviously, again, could be particularly bad. And it trickles down into TNT. Obviously, we have to be concerned when anything upsets international markets, when anything upsets our major trading partner like the United States, who's going to go through this. If you have not really followed the American lead up to the American elections for this year, November. It's happening. What the actual result will be, the end, I don't necessarily want to say, but we've seen it, right? More importantly, I have concerns that this war, if politics causes support to be taken away from Ukraine, it could actually, ironically, lead to a situation where Europe is at greater risk of being forced into a major conflict with Russia. A conflict they are not necessarily ready for because America was footing a lot of the defense bill. That is, whether you like it or not, one thing Trump got right. Germany is now trying to prepare itself to meet such a threat by 2029. We're in 2024. Things could move faster than they could potentially respond to. Meanwhile, here in TNT, I wouldn't say that either political party that currently makes a parliament is left-wing or right-wing, but the main or the only real differentiating factor outside of the aspects that are low-hanging fruit and don't really mean anything with regards to actual good governance, the main difference in governance ideology or political ideology between the two parties is big government and small government. And those are generally two of the core aspects of left-wing and right-wing politics. Left-wing is big government, more taxes, more programs to distribute wealth, to force equality, which when done to the unnecessary degree can be good, and when done overboard can be very bad. Meanwhile, UNC seems to be little government, less interference, less taxation, which again, when done too much could be very bad because you let people manipulate the system and get away with rhetorical murder, economically speaking. But when done to the correct degree, allows businesses to flourish because trying to micromanage things as a government who is not necessarily known for efficiency can be then put a very inefficient cap on the potential for businesses and what they could do entrepreneurially with regards to innovation, etc., etc. Do we have to worry that something similar can happen here? Where, again, we just had consideration now about more taxes. More taxes is more big government. Ironically, it's not to do new programs, but to try to maintain what we have, which is a lot of redistribution of wealth. To some extent, both governments can be progressive, because that's, at least at the time, what was popular. Will our opposition party potentially, effectively campaign on fixing the economy by trying to open it up for more private sector innovation and investment, for ease of doing business, something which basically it's unease of doing business? If we had a more effective mass communication capability in our opposition, that would be the obvious play, because to some extent it works. In fact, it might work even for people who don't deserve to be in government in other countries. So why can't it work for our opposition, which to some extent represents, at least on average, 40% of the population? This is the question we should be asking ourselves, not about, oh, the Afro-Trinidadian Party, the Indo-Trinidadian Party, the North Party or the South Party or the Central Party, the PNM or the UNC. These are the hard questions we should be asking ourselves. We don't even know if we have an immigration problem or not. I don't think we've really looked into the impacts on the economy. But we do have economic problems. And instead of having a debate on big government, small government, more taxes, less taxes, how to be more effective, we get a lot of bubble and bacchanal. So while the rest of the world, I'm afraid they might be overcompensating, at the very least they are looking for solutions. Whereas here in TNT, we're mired at the beginning, the starting point of the problem. Let's take a break. When we come back, we open the phone line. Stay tuned. This is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Sean Michael Small. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Policeman dies after collapsing during shooting practice. Roxborough man in police custody following rape of 14-year-old student. Finance Minister confesses to cutting fantastic 2016 UNC budget. National Commission for Self-Help suspends 4 senior employees. World Bank blanks Trinidad and Tobago in Global Growth Report. Now for the details. A police constable has died after collapsing while doing firearms training at the Grand Couva Range on Tuesday afternoon. PC Shasti Maraj, 39, was rushed to the Couva District Health Facility after he collapsed suddenly. He was pronounced dead while being treated. Inquiries are continuing into the cause of his death. A Roxborough man who was arrested following the rape of a 14-year-old student remains in police custody with charges yet to be laid. According to police reports, the Tobago student stopped a PH car to take her to school on Monday. The driver drove to another location where he allegedly beat and raped the child before dropping her off on the road near her school. School authorities contacted her relatives and she was taken to the Scarborough General Hospital where she was medically treated. Police subsequently arrested the driver. Finance Minister Com Imbit admits that although the Kamla Persad-Bissessar government had prepared a 2016 budget prior to losing the 2015 elections, he implemented expenditure cuts when the PNM entered office because of declining oil and gas prices. Now, in the midst of significantly lower than projected oil and gas prices And with a revenue shortfall for fiscal 2024, he is doing the opposite by expanding expenditure via supplementary allocation of $3.2 billion. The minister admits that the additional money is needed to meet recurrent expenditure that was not factored in his original budget presentation last October. Minister Imbit was speaking in the Senate as he presented the finance supplementation bill in the Senate yesterday.
Because in 2016, we had to use the budget of the UNC. The UNC had prepared a budget for fiscal 2016. They didn't think they would lose the 2015 election. So they prepared a budget, a fantastic budget, of $66 billion for that year in 2016. We had to cut that. The oil had dropped from $100 in 2014 to $40 by the time we did the budget in 2015 to $25 in next year. So we lost $20 billion in revenue. Gas plummeted from $8 down to less than $2. So we could not spend what had been appropriated. So it's actually 66.967 was appropriated, and we end up spending just over $52 billion in that year.
Trinidad and Tobago is not included among the Caribbean nations analyzed by the World Bank in its Global Growth Prospects report published yesterday. The 220-page document, which is considered to be a flagship report of the World Bank Group, analyzes the growth prospects of regions around the world, including 14 nations in the Caribbean. But there is no mention of Trinidad and Tobago, which is excluded from the larger list of 28 countries that constitute the Latin American and Caribbean region, because the Ministry of Finance failed or refused to supply the World Bank with the required data. The World Bank states that leave pending an ongoing investigation into corrupt practices. Commission Chairman Adrian Winter said no further details can be shared at this time in order to preserve the integrity of the process of the investigation and to protect the privacy and rights of all involved parties. He says the Commission continues to operate and serve the less fortunate in society without interruption. Well, that's the news on the hour on WESN. I'm sure Michael Small. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to Talking Point, and now is the time, as always, we open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewer. Have your say. Tell us what you think about what's been going on in news, which I think cycles. This is a low end. Of course, we have something big coming up at the end of the week, which could potentially have major impacts moving forward for the general election. And it will be something that hopefully we could speak about, but at the risk of not wanting to cause any sort of prejudice. With regards to the election, we might reserve most of our commentary for after with regards to the results, because at the end of the day, it's not as though I have intimate knowledge of who or what's in the internal conflict of the UNC. I just want to see the UNC do better. With that said, first caller, I believe, from Digger Martin. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Small.
Morning.
I'm going to start by asking all your listeners to reflect on Proverbs 13, verse 3. The person who speaks without thinking, etc., etc. And I want to focus that on the utterances of the Minister of National Security when he called into a TV program. I don't want to call the TV station.
Yeah.
And he said a lot of gang members has been arrested based on the bloggers. No. What that tells me? That tells me you are undermining the police. If the police detection rate is so low and they have an avenue, a tool to arrest these, why are you in cahoots with telling the criminals this is the tool we're using? Remember, they say certain MPs are in collusion with criminals. I just put in a big question mark. I mean to say the police service has not been successful in detecting. Now you have a good opportunity to be silent on that technique to get and arrest gang leaders, and you throw it out the window. Yeah, there's a court case that could be could be blown out of the windows. And more importantly, one of the gentlemen who was arrested and released say his life is under threat by both senior government officials, and it could now be placed in the hands of criminals. Where are we going with our Minister of National Security? I hope the police comes out, the TTPS, because their detection rate has been very, very low. Now it might go to 1.5. Go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Well, I understand what you're saying. The one thing, though, is it was always only going to be a limited window with regards to utilizing the videos as evidence from YouTubers, vloggers, etc. It was always going to be a limited window because at some point when the charges have to go into the court and the evidence is presented, they're gonna find out. That said, you would have had a window that could have been wider, but it only would have mattered if more vloggers would have continued to go and engage with the communities and the people in the communities who potentially are gang members. If there are no new vloggers going in, well then the videos that you have already, you could potentially look to get access to them to use them as evidence in further investigations. So it might not have mattered. However, I think on principle you are very much correct, and again, it's kind of funny. I would have preferred the police be the first group to speak on things like this and to reveal information to ensure that it is secure to do so, and maybe not the politician who, again, it's not his job to ensure safety and security, and yet he is the one being the initial source of sensitive information. We have San Fernando on the line. Good morning, caller.
Hey, good morning, Sean.
Morning.
You know, I have to agree with you on that first caller about Mr. Hines. It seems as if he's whatever little win is possible, they're trying to capitalize on it politically. Mm-hmm. And rightly so. It seems to me that it's going to undermine the work that the police is trying to do based on evidence that they collected from this particular gentleman. Now, that being said, I wanted to talk about that article where Karen Indira Rampasad and Valmiki Arjun commented. Everybody spoke about one thing in particular, about tax collection and in various forms, in terms of Karen talking about the Revenue Authority. But one of the reasons, I shouldn't say one of the solutions to our deficit issues is tightening up that tax collection issue. I remember the minister had said that in terms of tax collection, we are not collecting about $15 billion, and I know that is, and the Prime Minister commented on it as well, talking about VAT, people not paying their VAT, people you're going to buy something and you're not getting your what you call it, you're not getting a bill. So there is, I think, tightening up there is what we need. This new Revenue Authority, I hope they put people out on the road to visit these enterprises and collect what is collectible first, instead of trying to increase taxation. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. I am, first of all, I do want to say that on principle, I both disagree and agree with what the minister is doing, because in a very generic sense, he is kind of doing what I want seen to be done. More transparency in law enforcement, more information given out so that the public will have a better understanding and a better perception of the reality of what's going on. Of course, it's hard not to juxtapose that with the fact that he's playing political defense, or at least there's very little goodwill left for politicians on certain topics. Hence, it's very easy and very likely that a lot of the population is going to perceive it negatively, that he's just playing political defense on the issue. Oh, we didn't arrest any people in the videos? Look, we arrest people in the videos all of a sudden. Of course, sometimes when we look at politicians and have that criticism, indirectly we kind of insult the police officers doing the work. Again, I'm not saying all the police officers are great, but there are those that are going to do the work to keep the system running. So not every investigation is in bad faith. But with regards to tightening the tax collection, I both want to agree and disagree with you. And I find myself in a very awkward situation. I'm not sure if you're calling in or we have another caller from San Fernando. Is it? Caller? Morning?
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
Now, I have a question, right?
Sure, go ahead.
I have a hypothetical question. Let me see if you can help me. If your wife and a man go to South Africa and the man come back and tell everybody in the country, including the TV and radio, that he sleep with your wife as husband and wife, what she's supposed to do if it's true or not, and what you're supposed to do if it's true or not. Tell me.
Well, so you go with your wife to a foreign country, come back and say you slept with your wife?
Yeah, you say, I sleep with she as husband and wife. What she do about it, what she husband do about it, and what he wife do about it.
Is this referring to the Prime Minister's remarks about when they went to South Africa?
That's correct. I could say, yeah, because he said openly.
I mean, so I do believe it was rhetorical. I'm pretty sure he did not actually sleep with then Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar. So I'm not entirely too sure. Maybe I am missing your point, caller, and you could make it, and you could connect the dots for me.
Sean, you're playing naive. But you see, if you look at some of the things that happen or not happen, you might want to think, well, suppose it have a level of truth in it now. Maybe that's why we're not going to go after these guys forcefully enough. And I take that straight off to the press as well. Because like I always say, the press just asks certain questions, but they don't squeeze the ball hard enough. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure where you're going initially, but with the last part, yes, I could see that where our press potentially is not doing enough. One of the problems with modern journalism around the world is the economic factor. The economic factor has compromised various media institutions in various ways. Now, to what extent it has compromised local journalism, I won't say it's completely compromised or even majorly compromised, but there's tendrils seeping in, for lack of a better way to put it. There's the things seep in and creep in and subconsciously or even consciously affect, although we do have a fair amount of criticism, there is potentially more that could be done and said, but in part, it's not just because people might, whether intimidated or due to their own personal agendas, they don't want to speak about things. It's also in part due to the political environment. It's not really kind of pushing the narratives in a way that I think it should be pushed. And journalists have to, at times, work against the current on the narrative in general, not just coming from one side or the other, but the collective consensus of society, which I don't have time to explain what I mean precisely on that because we have two callers, I think. First caller, good morning. You on here?
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I'm a first-time caller. And I just want to say this. And what I have to say, I find that when I try to say this on the more popular stations, they ignore what I say, or sometimes they cut me off before I'm finished. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be libelous or anything like that. All right, but let me just tell you this.
Just be careful what your language say. Let me just say that up front. Okay.
I know the drill, right?
Okay.
What I'm just saying is there are certain things that I find people don't say in this country. It seems as if we have a thing about truth. There's a level of truth that is not discussed in this country, and it hurts me. And I'll explain. Now, I was born in 1953, right? So I've been down here a while. I grew up watching the PNM. I know the PNM. I know everything about the PNM. I have observed them all my life, all right? And I cringe sometimes when I hear people say, like one of the callers just now, I think even you said, well, you hope, no, a caller, he said he hopes that, he listened to the minister, and he hopes this new whatever this tax body that they're putting in place will do the necessary things and Come on. Why we still hoping and wishing this is the PNM we're talking about? The PNM operates only one way. They have been in office for 50 years, and people still seem to be hoping. There's no hope with the PNM. Why is it that our political scientists don't say that? Why is it that these criminologists don't say that? We keep dangling and going wrong in circles, and our country is getting worse and worse every day. This particular PNM that is in power now, they are attacking every institution, trying to, if they can't control it, they're attacking it. Doesn't anyone, are we not aware of this? And people seeing this, and I every day I wonder, say, we have all kind of discussions, people discussing. I listen to some of our political scientists like they're speaking in tongues because they don't want to speak the truth. Why are we, and we are a country, we have so much religious leaders, so much different religion. Why are these people so silent? Why are people not talking about noise pollution? Noise pollution is an attack on people's rights. People are not talking about it. So it comes like it doesn't exist. And we're just going from, why is Fitzgerald Hines in office? I have observed Fitzgerald Hines' tenure as a politician since I was a young man. Fitzgerald Hines has never accomplished anything of worth politically. He has never really done anything for the area that he would have represented for years. Why is he in office? Doesn't anybody, aren't we aware of the fact that the mere fact that he is still there with all the things that some people say, not enough people, as I said, right? Don't we realize that the Prime Minister is treating us with contempt by keeping that man there? I mean, it's glaring still. You want to see that. And yet we are silent on the issue, and we only talk on the periphery of the problem. We will get nowhere with the PM government. It is clear as day, and I'm not, listen to me, I am not advocating for the UNC, sir. Yes. I want to make that clear. Yes. I always tell people I am a Trinidadian. I know UNC, no PNM. The only party I was closely, that I might have come close to joining if they had stayed along with the NRL. So I like to make that clear to people. But the record of the PNM is as clear as day. Why are we still saying we hope this, we hope that? For sure, and if you listen to the man speak, the man is he just clowns around and then he moves on. I mean, what is wrong with us? Maybe you need to bring some criminologists and some political scientists on your program more often and put direct questions at them. Why? I don't understand as a society. How can we remain so silent? The country is turning to crap. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I'll respond to that. I can't say I disagree with the general principles of what you just said, but we have another caller waiting first, though. The caller, we lost the caller. Okay, I'm sorry for that. We got the calls back to back, and I didn't necessarily want to limit what that caller could have said, because for the most part, what he has said, and I find it interesting that his complaint is other media houses. First of all, I would not say that they're more popular, right? We have not had census on ratings and statistics on airplay for the last 10 years. 10 years. But with that said, I find it interesting that he says that what he just was talking about, he's been cut off. Because I don't necessarily see anything controversial with that, unless it's state media doing it, or a biased media house. Not enough hard truth is being discussed, and not enough practical reality is being discussed. And you can hear the frustration in his voice. It mirrors some of the things we have said in Talking Point, and others have said in the national conversation, but perhaps he's right. Not enough of it, and it is an inconvenient truth to the political class, because I very much, what I see is that the politicians don't actually want to deal with the problem. They want to deal with what they're comfortable dealing with, and what they tell you and me is the problem, not what the actual problem is. We have Takarigo on the line. Good morning, caller, you're on the air. Caller, good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you and your viewers, sir. Allow me to make a quick comment regarding the health sector. Just about a couple of weeks ago, my daughter had a fish lunch and, well, a fish meal, and she had a little adverse reaction. So I called her, and she started to sweat, looked like she was choking. I called the ambulance, excellent service.
Okay.
The people came, the paramedics, really professional. But the big mistake I made is I allowed them to take us to Mount Hope, Sean. When we went to Mount Hope, this was before 5:30 in the afternoon. Sean, we stayed there until 5 o'clock the next morning. We saw a doctor. We got an X-ray, but she had to see a specialist. We keep hearing the specialist on the compound, but he can't get to the emergency section. By 5 o'clock, my daughter couldn't handle it anymore, Sean. We just left. I had to start the process over again in private. Now, I want to compliment Dr. Rampal, a beautiful young female doctor who was very professional, very caring, loving to my daughter. But Sean, tell me something.
Yeah.
The Minister of Education don't know the terrible situation and the accident and emergency. I mean, you
mean
spend
the Minister
over...
of Health?
Huh?
You mean the Minister of Health or Education?
Education,
Okay.
no, the Minister of Health.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I want to invite him, Terence, come down there evening and look at how people are constantly coming in there on a stretcher and just have to stay in the corridor for hours. Even in the waiting room, Sean, the TV not working. I mean, something simple like that to make people a little comfortable. They can't keep that going, Sean. You spend, this PNM government in the past spent over $1 billion on a stadium in Taruba, right? But they can't just expand the accident and emergency in Mount Hope because it's grassroots people who don't have a voice, Sean. Oh gosh, boy, it's heart-rending, right? I mean, I could have used my credit card and go private afterwards, stretch the credit card to get attention from my daughter. But what about the people who can't do that, Sean?
Yeah.
I mean, the accident and emergency, but you know, a criminal came in with handcuffs, and he went to the top of the line, get emergency attention, and then they leave. So, I mean, expand accident and emergency. You build a whole hospital in Gandhi, but look at the hospitals that have the high volume.
Yeah.
Do a survey, a simple survey. I mean, oh gosh, it's an instrument that you could do on you know, the computer in 2 minutes, and just give it to the people, and you will see. You need to expand accident and emergency immediately. People are suffering while you're driving wrong in your Mustang, trying to look macho in your old age. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, caller. Now, I understand your frustrations. I'm not defending the situation, but I'm going to try to offer an explanation, because what happened is healthcare is basically constrained by economics. It's not capitalist economics, it's not communist economics. It doesn't matter what system of economy you run, economic forces, which generally speaking are due to human behavior and basic human psychology, will limit healthcare in various ways. And you could basically use the umbrella label economic forces. We have free healthcare. That's the priority. So what happens then now is we have limitations and we compromise in different ways on availability and quality. And then where that shows up in one of the easiest examples is the limited number of specialists. We are GATE. GATE puts out a lot of general practitioners, but we don't necessarily have enough specialists, right? And because we want the healthcare to be free, so because we don't have the economic money coming in from the consumer, and we have to pay for it, and we don't necessarily have enough funds, because you need, in theory, unlimited funds to make free healthcare high quality and universally available all the time without backlog. Therein is where we run into the problem. I'll go more into it, but we do have another caller waiting, so I don't want to take too long. So I'll continue after this caller. Good morning, caller. You on here? Morning, caller.
I had to call back to speak to the caller before the last.
Sure.
And I understand where the caller is coming from with the frustration, but he has to understand that the present government didn't reach there by force. They didn't take up guns to get there. People voted them in. Yeah. And they have to understand that. People voted them in. And he's not advocating you vote for the UNC.
Yes.
That's what he's saying.
Yes.
So then I would ask the caller, call in with a solution. Because I understand his frustration as well. What I said, remember months ago I said, my intention is to spoil my ballot. I am going to vote, but unless I see something else, because I haven't seen anything on the horizon. You hear things on the fringes. You hear about hope, but you're not seeing anything. The only two vocalists that you're seeing is the red and the yellow. You're not seeing anything else. So as a member of the society, if it comes to that, that's what I have to do, and that is how I'm going to express my frustration. I hope that is where people would express their frustration. If there is nothing else, so let them know, because not going to vote is not an answer. Vote, but have a significant amount of spoiled ballots, and that would say something. That would say something to all of them, unless we see something come up in the next 18 months or 17 months, and we say, okay, we can vote for this. Have a good day.
Thank you, caller. I mean, that strategy is about as good as any I could come up with for this election, because I think the solution that the caller who you were responding to, and I myself, it all comes down to one thing: not settling for mediocrity in our politicians and our leaders. And unfortunately, if we do that, if we want to make that sort of change, we're not necessarily going to see a lot of results in this election, because the two main parties are who they are. We might see a little bit of change in the UNC, but even if we have a big upset in the internal elections at the end of the week, it's still going to be, for more or less, I assume, the same political leader, and it's still going to be much of the same parliamentarian candidates for the House of Representatives that we're going to see, and some of the same people going to be, put up to be senators, depending on if they're in government or if they're in opposition. So, but that is the thing. I think his frustration, you all are both correct. What you're doing by spoiling your ballot is not being passive, because I think low voter turnouts, they've seen them already, and because their situation is not impacted by low voter turnouts, they're not necessarily going to be moved by it. So potentially a spoiled ballot will then do what Dr. Rampersad, I think, says will happen. You'll see it in the polls, but they have to see something. They have to see an affirmative action, not affirmative action, but an actual proactive step being taken on spoiling ballots. If there's a large number of them, it will do that. And I think what the caller, the thing about it is, you are right though, and it's what I was trying to respond to the caller in saying. The political environment is suppressing, to some extent, wider, more frank discussion. Part of that includes the potential, use or abuse of, well, sedition laws for one, as we have seen in some limited cases, but still a diverse collection of cases. And then, lawsuits over slander, of which there's one with Gianti Lashminial, Senator Lashminial, and Minister Cummings. I spoke, I think, about the situation, or maybe I didn't, and I was planning to, but the long and short is, I was wondering, where did that case reach? He was, I believe, defending himself, yes, with the police, wanting the police to clear the record for him. But with regards to the case that he had against the senator, where did it reach? Well, it's still in the process, right? And it might take a while, even if they fast track it or what have you. But I guess part of it is the healthcare system and all. It goes to show that we can't afford excess anymore. And the challenges in healthcare are not unique to Trinidad. But unfortunately, to some extent, it's not being managed as best as it could. And more importantly, the expectations of the population is not being managed as best as it should. Because this is just the reality of healthcare. You had to wait because we didn't have this. I am assuming the specialists, I hope it is a case of there were other cases that were ahead of the line than your daughter. And the specialist was not available to see her, and there was no other specialist. Because it seems as though, the thing is, if you have a critical, immediate life-threatening concern, car accident, gunshot wound, and you need emergency surgery now to save your life, within the next hour or so, you're dead. Public health is good for that. But the problem is, they don't have the capacity to treat with everybody right away. So unfortunately, they will triage, and people who they think could wait will wait. And of course, not always is it fine for some of these patients, like your daughter, to wait, right? So your concerns are correct, but unfortunately, it would take a lot. It's not just the Minister of Health being bad at its job. It will take a lot with regards to government policy, with regards to financing, in order to change the health system to hopefully do better. Unfortunately, as long as it's free, some of these limitations will always be there. They will always be there. You could go in the UK, you could go to Canada, they will have similar limitations. They will have similar problems. Maybe not to the same degree, but they will also have other problems. Why? Because in Canada, you get taxed for the free healthcare. We don't necessarily get taxed to the extent that it's going to finance 100% our free healthcare. And at the end of the day, we face a lot of complex problems that don't have easy solutions. Why are we going with the same old, and expecting different results? Albert Einstein, not a psychologist, but he did say, to him, that's the definition of insanity. I want to thank all of my callers today. We're over time, so no any specific thoughts to wrap things up. Just that if we want to see better, we ourselves need to do better. That ultimately is the one solution I could come up with. That's why it's the only one that I rarely offer Mr. San Fernando. We have to do better if we want the politicians to do better. Because right now, we're telling them, this is fine, so they're going to continue doing it. So, make today a good day. As my co-host always says, stay safe out there. There are a lot of things that could harm us that we have to be watchful for. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, above all political entities. And I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
WESN.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Young at heart, purpose-driven, patriot even. When you like to party, but are still passionate about discussing important issues, the only place where your needs will be met is WESN Content Capital.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, Bmobile 107, Digicel 21, ICNTT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
has actually pushed for a change as well. But who knows if a park promenade can really actually counterbalance the high rents there. But there is an argument for it, because Parisians do go often to one-off events on the Champs, be it a recent giant spelling bee, a picnic all along the avenue, or the nearly monthly Sundays when it is entirely walkable. So who knows? We all may be one day singing Aux Champs-Élysées.
Oh, I hope so, Solange. Thanks very much indeed. Great to talk to you. Solange Mougin for us there. Well, up next here on the programme, after a quick break, it's Across Africa, live with Georgia Calvin-Smith. Bye from me.
After 40 years of dictatorship, a handful of soldiers orchestrated a peaceful coup.
O objetivo era o quartel-general da GNR, Guarda Republicana. O povo entrou no golpe de Estado e transformou-o em revolução.
They were nicknamed the April Captains.
Dar ao povo português projeto político coerente com a nossa atitude, democratizar o país, levar o povo às eleições e integrarmos na Europa.
Volta atrás, que os combater e de alguma forma tentar que esses direitos que foram conquistados nos últimos 50 anos não voltem para trás.
Retrace the fall of Portugal's dictatorship in the Carnation Revolution Revisited on France 24.
France 24, your window on the world.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
In China, being a feminist is a daily battle.
I find that China is like a black box, disconnected from the world.
Our daughter thinks that if she's happy on her own, we'll be satisfied. But that's not enough for us.
Some women carry their message on stage.
In fact, women need us to speak up for them.
Others are forced to exile.
The political oppression and just the civic society has been more closed up.
What astounds me is finally having a place where I can express my anger.
A new edition of Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
On France24.com, click live. Find the stories you want to watch or to read about. Live news 24 hours a day in 4 languages. Explore the topics that captivate you. Are you looking for the latest news or to watch a show on demand? Follow us. Live international news is just a click away. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
I'm Dave Keating, and I bring you all the latest news from Europe's capital, Brussels, Belgium, from here at European Union summits to NATO meetings strategizing Europe's defense, here on France 24.
Dave Keating, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world. The history of our world is ever-changing. The flow of information is constantly increasing. We cover all subjects. We verify. We commit. On the ground, in all circumstances, to anticipate the future by understanding the present. We are with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. France 24, an alternative look at the news. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
The white outfit, why?
Well, because I've always loved that mix of feminine and masculine. I love that it doesn't fall into that caricature of feminine sensuality. And I also think it's very elegant.
For her ready-to-wear collection for winter 2024, Maria Grazia Curie is paying tribute to Mark Bowen, Dior's creative director between 1961 and 1989. In a bid to democratize high fashion and appeal to new markets, Bowen created the concept of Miss Dior, accessible ready-to-wear full of logos. That 60s spirit also coming through thanks to the bamboo sculptures by Indian artist Shakuntala Kulkarni, works designed to protect and transform the female body.
I think women right now have the freedom, you know, to really explore their creativity, explore art, explore love, and find power in what it is to be a woman, you know, and what it is to be feminine, and take pride in femininity and loving being what a woman is, and you know, and create something while we're at it, and make good fashion, you know?
Making good fashion sometimes begins with a process of deconstruction. Yoji Yamamoto, as ever, is a fan of change.
I started this question because I got bored for looking at women's body. Women's body is always beautiful, naturally, but I don't want to put the same outfit like a woman.
His catwalk show is both elegant and unsettling, alternately accompanied by music and silence.
I was put into a meditative state. I was very concentrated.
The opening without music.
I love the start, really slow, no music, really pared back. It was inventive and sculptural. All those shapes and those bodies that he alters, reconstitutes, reconditions, rebuilds.
At Issey-Miyake, meanwhile, Satoshi Kondo is determined to alter the world as we know it through his daring use of textiles. Pleats, drapery and swathes of swirling fabric combine to produce exciting new silhouettes.
The collection explores the origin of clothes. The body itself acts like a piece of fabric. I have a real passion for design, but also for the production side of things, which is a primitive, spontaneous act. It's based on intuition about what is and what has been. I think there's a real beauty in that. Maybe it's a way of exploring something that hasn't yet been discovered.
Yusuke Takahashi is the former creative director at Issey-Miyake. With his own label, he's invented new 3D knitting technology that combines traditional techniques with digital ones to keep waste to a minimum.
So, but we focus again the word knitwear. The word the knitwear, the wear was described the object, what the contain or the hold something. So and then so I define the clothing is the kind of the tool of our daily life. That's why so the practical is very important word for us.
Designers often find themselves drawn to their roots in the quest for inspiration. South African stylist Laduma Ngokolo found himself drawn to museum archives and anthropological studies in a bid to reconnect with his Xhosa roots.
My brand, Xhosa, is based on that aesthetic and that research that I found out and realized that our ancestors have been creating beadwork craft, they've been creating motifs, they've been creating patterns. That is beautiful, but however, most of those artifacts are in museums, of which is I feel like they should be evolved. Small community culture can be beautiful.
Mosi Traore's collection has three main sources of inspiration: the work of South Korean contemporary artist Lee Bull, the Indian continent, and Madame Grey, considered the queen of pleating.
Sadness, anger, hope. It's nice to end on hope because we're living through an era where there's a lot that divides us. It's good to end on a note of hope.
Traoré founded Atelier Alix, a fashion school located in a working-class suburb east of Paris.
When you see what's become of people like Omar Sy or Kylian Mbappé, you know that the best footballer in the world comes from the Parisian suburbs. That's a wonderful thing, and it gives me hope. But there's still a long, long way to go, because there's this social malaise that's real, you know? And it means projects like these are really needed. This fashion school in the Parisian suburbs, it gives a chance, it gives hope to these young people, the opportunity to dream. But it's vital that the dream is accessible, that it's not just this unachievable thing.
Accessible, que ce soit pas un rêve inaccessible en fait.
Which begs the question, is it fashion that has the power to transform reality? Or is it more a question of how reality can change fashion?
Hi there, so welcome, come on in, welcome to my house, or my parents' house.
28-year-old Niamh works in education. She can't afford to rent or buy even a small place.
I would like to maybe move in with my partner or like do something like that, and that's just not an option really. There's different decisions of life being put off or kind of taken into consideration about how that would work, because your house is your base, and if you don't have a base, then it doesn't make sense to make decisions.
Hello. Her brother will soon finish university and wonders about the future.
Living at home?
Oh, very good. I like to live in Ireland if I can. If I can't, then yeah. Time to try somewhere else.
In Ireland, 2/3 of under 30-year-olds still live with their parents. It's one of the highest rates in Europe. Niamh lived abroad before the COVID pandemic. She's considering moving overseas again like some of her friends.
I'm staying here and I want something to change. Whereas it's easy to say, like, I'm going to move and get something better somewhere else. Staying is harder.
The home is in Enfield, a small town 40 kilometres outside of Dublin. The fields where Niamh used to play growing up have been replaced by houses. The area is attracting more and more commuters, with property prices soaring in recent years. The housing crisis hits both rural and urban areas. In a Dublin suburb opposite a petrol station, this flat has a new tenant.
We put it on the market there a couple of days ago, and we have over 800 inquiries for the property. We can't advertise a property over the weekend because we would have thousands of email inquiries.
In 10 years, the rent for this one-bedroom flat has gone from 900 to 1,600 euros a month.
Where it used to be single occupants, now it is mostly couples. And sometimes we do get applications in from small families. It's heartbreaking, and that's being honest with you, to see the desperation in the people that are looking for accommodation. We need about 45,000 units on an annual basis. That's for young couples that want to move together, people that are separating, that are trading apart, want other properties, and also people that are moving over to Ireland because it's very desirable to live and work here. So they're all coming over, but we have not met the demand in the last number of years.
Ireland has been attracting a number of companies and high-tech giants. Housing for employees is critical. Estate agent Ronan Crinion has a place to show us.
The next road over, okay, if you want, it'll only take us 1 minute to drive. It's a very large development of site, and there's planning permission for hundreds of houses.
The site with its protected buildings will undergo a major facelift.
That was the residence for the nuns that lived in the convent, okay, and worked in the hospital. They're going to move the hospital elsewhere because we're developing hospitals in Dublin. There are a number of religious grounds on the fringes of this part of Dublin, so they're all going to be developed over the next decade or two.
The 19th century chapel will be surrounded by new apartment blocks, including some social housing. Despite the lack of affordable homes, the Irish Property Owners Association wants the end of rent control that limits to 2% annual rent increase in designated areas. They say it discourages potential landlords. Crinion disagrees.
Rent control is good, all right, because there's a percentage of landlords that are greedy and they will move the tenants out to get a higher yield, and that's all they want. They don't think of the tenant or the occupant and wishing that they live happily ever after at a rent that will increase on an annual basis.
A housing commission set up by the government calls for a radical strategic reset. It says there's a deficit of over 250,000 homes in Ireland. According to the report, the state also needs to step in building more social housing and rely less on the private sector. First-time buyers are struggling to enter the market, and affordable housing must be a priority.
Welcome back to Around the World. I'm Nadia Massi. A look at our headlines this hour. A redrawing of France's political landscape ahead of the early elections. Eric Ciotti insisting he remains the president of the Republican Party a day after he was ousted over his support for the far right. Meanwhile, leaders of the new left-wing alliance meeting to divvy up seats. Senior officials also discussing who might be their candidate for Prime Minister should they win the most votes.
WESN.
Good day and welcome to this week's edition of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Dono, attorney at law. Once again, I'm happy to be here. Once again, I'm happy to bring the law and you. And of course, this program is to educate, inform, and to entertain. and none other than WESN Content Capital, where you can stream us on all social media platforms, including WESN-CC, as well as traditional media. Not forgetting our podcast, Strictly Legal with Rondell Donowa. And today, I'm very privileged to have a guest via virtually, who will be speaking about a landmark decision that was recently concluded in the High Court of Justice in Trinidad and Tobago concerning domestic violence and accountability, none other than Douglas Mendez, Senior Counsel. But before that, we have our new segment, which is Legal Lingo, where we would basically describe and explain different legal terms that may be unfamiliar or may be confusing to you. So let's hear it, Legal Lingo. Our legal word for today is precedent. A precedent is a ruling that a court has already established, and lower courts usually follow the decisions, or what we call the precedent of the higher courts. Precedents are used to settle similar legal matters by applying cases and legal issues that have already been decided by a court. And in its context, of course, this case that we are going to discuss would have established a precedent. And if it goes through without an appeal, let's say that this case has been fully decided. Yes, it has been fully decided, but let's say there's no appeal, there's no further decisions. Therefore, courts of a similar nature may apply these principles. Or let's say, for instance, the matter has been appealed and the appeal has upheld the decision of the lower courts, then the lower courts will have to take the decisions of the higher courts. So that is precedent. So let's take a break and we'll be right back with more.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
And we are back on Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. And as I said before, today we will be discussing a landmark decision in domestic violence accountability titled Justice for Samantha. And just a bit of background without going too much into detail, because of course we will have the guests to discuss about it. Samantha Isaacs, she was a domestic violence victim who was shot in both legs and behind her head by an abusive, jealous, and possessive ex-husband or ex-boyfriend 6 years ago. And on May the 16th, Justice Robin Mohammed held that her rights and that of her mother, because her mother basically filed an action and her son to the protection of the law and respect for private and family life. And what the court would have indicated is that their rights were infringed by the inaction of the police and the judiciary. And she would have requested basically certain declarations, as well as the court awarded compensation. And we will discuss in terms of how this matter came to fruition, what were the legal principles,